So I got the frame back from the powder coaters. They did an awesome job on this thing, and I think this is as close as I could have got to the original color, if not the exact same. This thing came out really good and they did a really good job. I also have the bearing kits for the linkage and the swing arm. So to try and get this frame to balance on the bike stand properly, I'm gonna put the swing arm back in. I got the old bearing out of the swing arm, just using a socket that was the same size as the bearing, and just basically pressing it out using the bench vise. These are the old bearings. As you can see, they definitely need replacing. The thrust bearing is missing a lot of those rollers, and the actual bearing itself is just full of mud. So I'll throw these new ones in now. Basically using the same method, I'll just use a socket of the correct size and push these in. The chain slider and the chain guide are actually in pretty good shape. I've pulled them apart and washed them in the parts washer, so I'm definitely going to reuse those. I've also got this bolt kit with all brand new bolts and washers, so I'll be using that as much as I can. The linkage is up next, and I've also just cleaned these things up in the parts washer, so I'll push these old crusty bearings out and put the new ones in. So we've run into a bit of an issue here. This is the old bearing that I just pressed out of this linkage piece. So obviously it's an interference fit, would need to be pressed back in. That's the old bearing anyway. Here's the new bearing. That is the wrong bearing. I know these bikes, they're different to the US models, and there's a lot of small differences, and obviously that's one of them, because none of these bearings in this kit are the right for this linkage. Which is a bit of a shame, because I bought this bearing kit from an Australian motorbike shop, and it is advertised for a 99 RMX, but I guess the manufacturer of the actual bearings are American, so this does not fit the Australian version, unfortunately. I'm not sure if the rest of the kit is going to fit this, but I'm not going to try. I'm just going to try and return this. I don't know how I'll go now, because I've actually taken the bearings out of the packet. But I'll see how I go, and I'll maybe have to just order some bearings by themselves through Suzuki. I have the swing arm in the frame and the frame strapped to the stand now, so I can work on it a bit easier. I've done a few small things off camera, like put the VIN plate on, some of the frame rubbers for the tank and the tank strap, and also the chain rollers. This bottom chain roller is off the CRF project, which is right there. The roller off this frame, if you remember, was missing, so I just dug through my parts bin from the CRF build, and there was a roller that was a similar size to the top one, so hopefully that works out. What I want to do now is check the replacement subframe I bought. I bought a 98 RM250 subframe to replace the RMX subframe that had been cut and is a little bit bent. So I'm going to throw the airbox in this one just to make sure the airbox fits, and then test fit this on the frame, and hopefully everything's good. The RMX airbox, which I've just cleaned up, fits pretty well in the RM subframe, so that's a good start. So I'll throw this on the frame now, make sure the actual subframe fits this frame. The good news is the 98 RM250 subframe fits. I think most people know about this one on the forums anyway. The bad news is that this subframe is actually more bent than the RMX subframe. If I try and line up the down tube of that frame, can you see how bent that is? I'll see if I can line it up from the back. But this subframe is actually more bent than my original one was. So luckily I only paid $80 because that is basically scrap. Hopefully I have better luck with this front end I bought. This is a 2008 Rmz 250F front end. I'm gonna try and make this fit on the RMX frame. Doing a fork swap is pretty easy. You can get most of your information from the All Balls website, where they have, you can type in your current bike and it'll tell you a bunch of other bikes that have either matching bearing sizes or they have kits for that they can convert. The only thing you need to figure out is the stem length. I use that same method to convert the front end on the XS650. That's a 1975 Yamaha and it has a 1992 Suzuki GSXR front end on it. So to test fit these forks to see if they're going to work in my application, I need to put the radiators on the frame and I also need to put the tank on the frame to make sure that there's clearance. And the other thing that is usually an issue or could possibly be an issue is the steering stops. So sometimes you need to be handy with fabrication to make some steering stops, or just pray that the steering stops on the donor forks will work with your setup. I've got some replacement Gpi radiators. I use these same radiators on the CRF build here. Really happy with the quality of these. The only issue I've had with these radiators is that the spring in the radiator cap is usually not as stiff as the same pressure of genuine brand. So I would recommend switching that out for your stock cap, but the radiators themselves are fine. The original RMX radiators are a little bit bent and sort of crusty. And there's also some fatigue to the aluminium down here. You can see the cracking. The right-hand radiator is actually in better shape. There's nothing really wrong with this one. It's nice and straight, but it's actually cheaper to just buy these aftermarket radiators than it is to replace one of the original radiators. So I'll throw these on now, and then I'll throw the tank on and put the triple clamps in and see if we can test fit these forks. So the actual lower bearing on the Rmz 250F triple clamp is the exact same bearing as the RMX bearing. The only little difference is that seal around the bottom. So hopefully that seal works with the head tube on my frame. This is the Rmz Steering Stop right here. This basically just hits up against the frame, which it does on the RMX frame. So that's a good start. This is where the steering stops on the original triple clamps would have hit. So this is the tab on the frame, and there was 2 steering stops on the actual triple clamps, and they would hit against that. So it's actually really lucky that these steering stops just hit against the frame and work like they do from the bike they came from. We have clearance between the tank and the triple clamp. And we also have clearance between the triple clamp and the radiators and the radiator shrouds. So as far as I'm concerned, the 2009 Rmz 250F fork swap onto an RMX frame is a straight swap. I should have also mentioned before that I put the steering lock back in. Now this steering lock, the barrel doesn't actually come out if you take this plate off. I know I said in the earlier episode that it does, but you actually need the key to get the barrel out. So even if you get this plate off, the actual barrel will not come out unless you have the key. So having a screw in this thing doesn't really affect anything, because if someone was to take that out, that doesn't mean they could get it unlocked anyway. The stem in these Rmz forks don't have the hole for the steering lock, but that's something I might add. But I might just drill a hole in the Rmz steering stem for that to work. Because I'm using the Rmz front end, I'll also need to use the Rmz front wheel. unless I want to modify the RMX front wheel to go in those forks, which I cannot be bothered with. I'd rather just use a digital speedo like I was intending to anyway, because I'm using this front wheel and these forks. I also needed the front caliper set up. That's why I bought the whole front end. So if you are planning on doing a fork swap, it's a good idea to get the whole front end so you have everything you need. It also mentioned in some cases when doing a front end swap, you don't always need to get the caliper off the donor bike, because as you can see, this is the caliper off the donor bike in my hand, and this is the caliper off the RMX, the original RMX caliper. And as you can see, they're the exact same caliper. So I didn't actually know that till I got the forks in my possession, but a little bit more research probably would have, I would have found out that these calipers are exactly the same, and I could have just reused it. The Rmz disc seems to be in pretty good shape, so I'll definitely be reusing that. Put the Rmz front wheel on the bike just so it would balance on the stand a little bit easier, and I also threw these fat bars on that actually came with the front end. I was planning on putting fat bars on anyway, so it's kind of convenient that this front end actually came with them. I'll possibly be rebuilding the forks before the end of the build, if not rebuilding, at least replacing the seals and oil, and I'll also need to look into fixing the wheel up, either pulling it apart and painting it, or maybe just replacing the bearings. But that's about all I'll be covering in this episode of the RMX250 build. So let me know down in the comments what you guys think of the build so far, and make sure to subscribe. Thanks for watching, guys.